For my mindset today is Friday, the 22nd of September. Today we're talking about scaling from 10 to 160 plus employees. I'm told record time with Daniel Wang. He's the VP of Finance and Legal at a company named Iterative Health. I actually know about this company through a friend named Amit Garg, who is an investor and also had Amit on the show back in 2020, I think. And I just want to say welcome, Daniel. I know that AI and healthcare is something that's vital to our lives, and if it's preventative medicine or precision medicine, as you say, then there's a lot of value into that because it could be saving life, right? And I know that that's really important because that's really what we are at the end of the day, life. So Daniel, man, just want to say welcome in, and it's good to meet you.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for having me on the show.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I guess Daniel, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you're from? And I know the MIT MBA is also cool, but were you raised in like the East Coast, or like how did you come
Yeah,
to
so I was
that?
born and raised. I was born and raised on the East Coast. Have lived here and worked and went to school all along up and down the East Coast. My in a previous life, I've mostly been on the finance side and on the investing side. So I've seen really cool companies, really interesting companies. Done it for private companies at a private equity firm. I've looked at equity investing at a public for public companies as well. And one of the things that made me want to switch to the startup world was one, just the MIT experience exposed me to a lot of founders and entrepreneurs who are really trying to make a big impact to the world. So I really like that idea of the work that I was doing at a startup could have more outsized impact than maybe I was used to from a day-to-day perspective. But also because I've been on the other side looking at a lot of these companies,
Oh,
working
true.
on like looking at the things that they were doing, which seemed really interesting and really impactful, and really value add. And I wanted to get onto the other side to be in a company that is doing that and helping with the operations.
Man, yeah. Did how much you think? I guess like being in MIT like influenced that course of action, right? Just since I don't know, a lot of people who go to get an MBA, like is that what you had planned as you were getting an MBA, or like were you thinking about other career stuff too, or?
I was thinking about a lot of other career stuff as well. I think I wasn't really sure at that point what I wanted to do afterwards. I did like change and I wanted some form of change, but I wasn't sure what my next step was. So I would say if I hadn't gone to MIT and done my MBA, I probably wouldn't be working at a startup. And so it did have a lot of exposure to really interesting technology and also really interesting entrepreneurs and really um, kind of founders and entrepreneurs that were really successful and really inspiring.
Yeah, yeah. I was wondering too, like I know Boston's big in healthcare, right? Just I guess it's one of those places in the country that emphasizes it a lot. Did you always have a deep interest in that, or was it just like you came across Iterative or the founders behind Iterative, and they had a really compelling vision that brought you in, or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say it's both. And so when I was working on the private equity side, I was primarily focused on pharmaceutical companies. So there was always some interest in healthcare. Um, my wife is now also a doctor, or she's in the medical field, and so it's something that I've been exposed to, and I'm sure we all have people we know that go into medical school and become attendings and all that. So it's always been around. The thing that kind of got me to commit to joining a startup and working with Iterative Scope is much more on the vision and the impact that it can have. And the CEO of the company really sold me on his vision of where the company is going and the potential impact that the company can make. And that's how I came to join the company. And it was just an added bonus that it was in healthcare and it was on technology.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've heard about them in I think 2019 it was, but I didn't know because I think they might have been in stealth actually. But so it's Iterative Health. I know that it's a healthcare company using AI, but what exactly does it do? And I know it's in the gastroenterology space, enterology space, but How do you tell people what iterative is, or you know?
Yeah, so we're a health tech company. And maybe what I can do is answer your question a bit broader
Uh-huh.
because there's a vision behind what AI can do in the GI space. And we as a company are trying to do a lot of that. And so one example of that is we have an FDA cleared medical device. And that device basically is a aid to doctors. So I don't know if you've had a colonoscopy yet, but generally patients over the age after a certain age threshold need to have a regular colonoscopy. And when you have these colonoscopies, doctors are looking for adenomous polyps. And these are polyps that if you find them and remove them, the more that you find and the more that you remove, the lower your risk is for colorectal cancer. So one of the things that we're doing as a company, we've built this device that can help support that. And so when you're performing a colonoscopy, there's a camera inside the patient's body. The doctor's looking at a screen and they're looking to find these polyps.
Hmm.
We've built something that can take that video image and speak and act between the camera and the monitor to real time look at that the video stream coming in and draw boxes around where there's potential areas that the doctor should look at more closely. So if I take a step back and think about AI in general, there's two kind of thoughts I have, which is one, AI can be when you go to the doctor, you want to probably see the best doctor that you can see, one that has a lot of experience and one who's fully engaged in listening to you. So if you're the idea of AI is that you can train an algorithm to be able to get you to that same level of care you would receive from a really good doctor who's fully engaged, so that even if you're going to, let's say, someone with less than a fellow that has less than a year of experience seeing patients or doing colonoscopies, or you're going to a doctor who's super experienced, but he might be really tired after a long day, you're getting that same level of a second check of a care that you can get with the addition of AI as a technology.
Is this being implemented right now, or is it like still to come, or like how do you
So
yeah.
for us, there's a few AI in general in healthcare. There's a lot of AI companies working on some that are FDA cleared, some that are not, that are doing some form of this. In radiology, there's AI firms that are reading slides and providing input. We're doing colonoscopy support, and so this is something that's been cleared. This has been in a few places already, and this is something that we're continuing to roll out now. So that's something that we're doing as well. I think the long-term goal for, at least for us in AI in the GI space, is being able to help with decision support for doctors. And so what that means is, let's say we take a disease like inflammatory bowel disease.
Hmm.
And with inflammatory bowel disease, there is for folks who have moderate and severe inflammatory bowel disease, sometimes it's really hard to figure out what type of treatment you should get in order to resolve or help with your symptoms. And right now, the way a lot of doctors prescribe, and the standard for how you do it is there's a first line of defense, there's a second line, there's a third line if it doesn't work. This changes a little bit based on demographic information, and it changes a little bit based on the way the risk factors that a patient might have. But if you use AI, you can look at all the data that is already existing. There's EHR records of all these different patients, capturing all sorts of data points from them that
Hmm.
makes them unique patients. And there's also historical data of how these different types of patients have reacted to different drugs. So the segmentation of the patients is different. It may no longer be, hey, people who are age 30, it might not be super broad, but now it's like every single person is in some ways their own type of patient, and you have data points on how they react to different types of treatment and different doses of treatment. And going from that, AI can take a look at learning from all these historical examples, and then if you have a new patient and you have all the information that is available that you can input into the algorithm, then maybe it can give you an estimation of this patient might do better on this type of drug and this type of dosage. And that's the vision that I think a lot of companies are working towards, is
Oh,
more personalized medicine.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I guess like for iterative scope or iterative health, they achieve that through just giving doctors more knowledge, or kind of that just just more in depth, like I guess imaging, right? Or like just kind of just answers to make an informed decision, because they eventually are the ones who prescribe the drugs,
Exactly.
or what do you call it, future treatments or surgeries or things like that.
Yeah, our goal is to provide doctors with all the knowledge and all the information, so that the doctors themselves can make can make a better decision, or have the tools to make a better decision to improve patient outcomes.
I got a quick question, Daniel. What is I know it's not a colonoscopy, but it's like a colon cleansing, right? Is that a treatment too, right? Like that people get to just clean their colons?
Yeah,
Because I ordered something like that for someone before.
yeah, and it may be what you're thinking about. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is, um, before a colonoscopy, a lot of times you will need to cleanse your colon because,
Uh-huh.
of course, if it's not clean, if your bowel prep is not
Very,
great, and
yeah.
everything's hidden, so the doctors can't see anything. But I'm sure there's also a lot of other kind of uh, for folks who aren't doing a colonoscopy, I'm sure there's a lot of different kind
Like
of
services or like,
non-medical procedures that exist out there that try to do something similar of cleaning the colon. I can't claim if those are effective or not, or
yeah.
I don't know the details of them to know how they work, but I'm sure there's plenty of things out there.
What prompts somebody, I guess just curious for the regular listener, like what prompts them to get a GI like inspection, or to call, is it always just you turn a certain age and that's what the doctor suggests, or like is it
Yeah,
just anyone can do it if they're curious?
generally you turn a certain age and you have to get a screening. And because that's a gold standard in terms of uh, determining um, in preventing colorectal cancer. And so what that certain age is and how frequently you get screenings is based on one, your age, but also your family history, and certain risk factors for disease. So a colonoscopy is really, for most people, is mostly used as a way to prevent colorectal cancer. And so you think of it as just a regular screening that you eventually have to do at a certain age.
I hear you. Yeah, yeah. That's important. I think like a lot of times people are conscious about their health since like the pandemic happened, right? Just
Yeah.
just the conversations are more frequent. But do you think that the technology here could work for, like, I don't know, like other intrusive, or what do you call it, invasive procedures, like surgeries, or I don't know, like anything else?
Yeah. Generally speaking, using machine learning, using computer vision is applicable across a broad range of applications. And of course, we think that our technology is also something that is applicable to different areas as well. We focus on the colonoscopy space first and then the GI space second, because you need very specific data in order to train the algorithm and to
Mhm.
feed information to the kind of the AI formula. But if you have enough data, you have enough inputs, you can use it for a lot of possibilities.
Right, right, right. Has there been any like has there been any feedback from, I guess, doctors, or like, I guess, people too have benefited, or just
Yeah,
been a part of the
we've
technology
just
process?
so I would say this. I think we on our website we have a lot of links to publications that we've done in terms of scientific publications. We have, I'm sure, certain testimonials from different folks who've used it. Um, I would also say that the FDA, if in order to get a cleared device, you have to show that there is some benefit to patients. That I think what the FDA cares about is, one, it doesn't there's a lot of benefit. There's benefits to patients, and that benefit is outweighs any additional risk to the patients. In our case, our device isn't being put inside a patient's body, but still, that there's this benefit and risk analysis that the FDA weighs, and they have a very rigorous approach to looking at devices. And so the fact that we're cleared, I think, indicates that there's definitely benefit, and we've have some scientific papers that I'm sure people can look at if they want to get more details.
Man, yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I guess yeah, it's such an interesting space with gastroenterology, and like that's kind of, what's that word? It's kind of relevant to everyone, right? Because everybody
Right.
has that body part that could be in risk of disease or anything. Would you say that the product has always had that vision to serve that need, or was it like something that pivoted or just moved along
Yeah.
and didn't go exactly how it was planned?
Yeah. I think the overall vision has always been that technology can be a great equalizer in terms of patients receiving optimum care. And so the goal is, as the CEO founded the company, and to put words into his mouth, the idea that he can develop technology that can really improve patient outcomes. So it doesn't matter if you're in a hospital system with less trained doctors, maybe in a different part of the world, or if you're seeing the best GI physician with the best credentials and lots of experience, right? That you're getting similar levels of care. So that's the
Mhm.
whole goal. And we've come and looked at different technologies and products to help us achieve that goal over time.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I think uh someone I know will indirectly be a not a customer, right? But like could possibly have been benefited from Iterative. So that's pretty awesome. One thing I want to jump into, Daniel or Dan, is what I guess you joined the company right when it was under 10 people and all that. And I guess as we learned that there's more than 100 people here now, has that process of taking the venture capital funding been as easy as it might seem, or how has that been for everybody there, and
Yeah.
applying it
So
to hiring and R&D and whatever else you could?
I think when you take venture capital, and we've been fortunate enough that a lot of different investors have believed in our vision, um, it's different than being bootstrapped, right? Because that's the alternative, is to bootstrap yourself with your own funding and the revenues that you generate. And so when you take venture capital, I think of it as um, you have an additional level of responsibility to your investors, and making sure that
Mhm.
you're taking care, you have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that that money is being spent well, right? And I think what that goes to is something that I've thought a lot about, is there's when for a successful startup, or at least from what I've seen, there's different levels of prioritization that you want to make sure you do with your capital that you have, because everyone cares about runway and how much longer um, you have to in order to achieve your objective or get you to the next fundraising cycle. And so one example is, you don't want to be a less than 10 person company and have a really swanky office on the top of, let's say, a New York skyscraper, right? That just doesn't make any sense. You're probably more focused on, how do I increase revenue? How do I build out my product? Something along those lines. So I would almost say, from our journey of when I joined, less than 10 people to over 160, I see it in multiple stages. I see it in, hey, there's a less than 30 um, employees, and
Right.
that's where you're just really trying to figure out what it is that is important. So is it the basics of, if you're not making revenue, it's I need to understand who's spending my money and where it's going, and making sure there's good documentation on how things are. That's my finance background, speaking of, like,
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
to track our costs and understand what we're spending on. Because even with less than 30 employees, you might not know exactly how all your different employees are spending, and if it aligns to how you want the company priority to be. Because that's really important to you, because you probably have less capital, right? I think as you grow, there's this transitory period before you get to 100 employees where the kind of the operational side becomes a little bit more important. You have enough employees that communication isn't super easy. With less than 30 employees, you can probably get everyone in a room and just talk to them, and they're one person away from you, or they're directly next to you. Um, when you are more than that and less than 100, I think you start building out a lot more infrastructure. So
Yeah, the operational like
the
process changes,
operational,
right?
like,
Or like your
yeah,
life
it
change, your
changes, like
job changes.
best in class, like not even best in class, but just like more standardization, um, more kind of focus on how to communicate company priorities, and kind of get people aligned to what they're doing. So I'll give you even one simple example of that. And then of course 100 plus, it becomes even more complex in terms of how do you drive the organization, make sure everyone's believes in the mission and vision and are focused on the right things. Right. But things change. So I'll give you one example that's really small,
Sure.
but can illustrate this. So one thing that we did when we were less than 30 employees was we had a lot of requests of, hey, like this, I want this type of equipment. I want a wireless mouse and a wireless keyboard, versus the company had provided standard, let's say standard equipment of like just, $20 or like wired keyboard, wired mouse. And so we implement this system where we told employees, we give you $200 a year, that carries over. So if you don't spend it the next year, you have $400 or $350, depending on how much you spend, to use to upgrade whatever essentials that the company gives you to something better. That way, we didn't have to kind of take requests and make decisions, but employees had some ability to make decisions of, for me, this is important for me to have a wireless keyboard, so I'm going to spend that money on getting a wireless keyboard, right? Versus whatever standard package we gave. Over time, for 30 employees, that was easily trackable. We have one Excel sheet, we can kind of keep track and do this.
Right, right.
Yeah, 150 employees, that system breaks down. It takes a lot more time to figure out, sorting out from all the kind of reimbursement receipts, who has done this for this program, how much money they have each year, how that goes into our audited financial statements in terms of kind of liabilities, their employee benefits and all that. And so you start to look for something different and a more systematic way to treat
Just, I guess,
benefits,
employee
right?
demand, right? Or like
Yeah, employee
changes.
demand or benefits. But that's the same thing as like every part of the business process. That's just a really small example, and one that sure we could probably still manually do for a while if we wanted to, but it's just an illustrative example of how small things can become really which are fine to leave as is when you're less than 30, can become really inefficient over time as the company grows.
Oh man, yeah, that's a good point. Dan, one thing I want to hear is like a lot of the companies they if they don't get to Series B like within like 3 or 5 years, maybe like that means they're not doing well enough. For you and you know how long you've been at Iterative Health, what do you think it was that convinced a Series B investor or venture capitalist to go on board and I guess yeah have a big Series B be accomplished? Was it like a lot of yeah, because it's interesting, right? Because some people they can't raise a Series B, just nobody wants to be in that as an investor after that. Like, what do you think it is that separates some startups even that are able to get to Series B? Because not everybody gets a Series B, right? Like a good percentage, like even half don't get there.
Right. I think first and foremost, you really have to have a good idea of what you're shooting for, right? Like, what is your mission? What are your goals? What are your objectives for the company? And And does that resonate with investors? I assume that if for most startups, if they've been able to raise, they've been able to at least sell that overarching vision to investors. But then with each stage that you raise, investors start becoming more and more specific on, and you have to be very specific as a company on, this is how much money I want to raise, and this is what I'm going to achieve with the amount of capital that I've raised, right? These are the goals that will say, hey, this I have succeeded in terms of, let's say you're raising a Series A and you want $5 million. Um, these are the goals that after I've raised $5 million, that if I achieve it,
Yeah,
I'll feel
yeah.
like I've been successful and I can go out and raise a Series B, right? But of course, nothing works out exactly the way you want it to work out. And so there's a lot of pivoting and there's a lot of changing that you'll need to do. And I think the key to a really successful company and not is first of course impart a lot of luck, but second is being very clear in terms of what your goals are, if it's working or not, and then making that decision to change course and when you still have time
Right,
and
right,
still
right.
have runway.
And one thing, I guess Series B is considered growth stage companies, right? Or like Series B and C's. That's kind of
Yeah, I think it depends on the
the
company
company. Yeah.
and how they name their rounds.
True,
But
true.
I would say that in the most case, once you get past Series B, at least the Series B plus companies I've seen, um, they start to hit that stage.
Do you feel like success is, or I guess like a lot of, yeah, VCs would consider success as like an M&A or like an IPO. And do you think that success in the company with how you guys, the executive team's trying to bring it towards is really just that vision of having the product be used widespread and um, really value to the customers versus this notion of having to raise multiple rounds of funding. I guess there's two types of success, right? But like there's always that, I guess the bootstrap way or like the non-dilutive way is just focus on customers and growing a business. But then there's like a financing aspect, which is future rounds of funding, growing valuations, and returning that capital to the early people. Do you think that if you just focus on the customers and growing product that that stuff should just figure itself out and people will just be there to invest? Or do you think like raising a Series C is or a B, yeah, any series after this is um more contingent on like investor sentiment or like luck
Yeah,
and
so
factors that we don't control?
I can answer for myself
Yeah,
and
man.
in terms
It's
of what's important to me. And for me, I think what keeps me at this company and also what keeps me at any company that I work at is much more on the impact and this and the mission, right? And that's why culture is something that's so important. It's not something that people talk about a lot. And there's also, I think, um, it's very hard to have a very standard playbook for building culture. But the mission of the company, the impact that you feel like you're having as a part of the company is really, really important. So for me, what success defined at is if we can continue to build out products that help patients
Mhm.
and add value to patients, um, to our partners, to stakeholders. And you have to believe that if you are adding a lot of value to your stakeholders, the revenue and the dollars will come, or and the investors will see that kind of value add and be willing to back you. So far, they have been for in our case, but I think in reality, that's a constant that you can focus on is like how much value you are adding as an organization, as a company, because what investors look for each round can differ.
Mhm.
And I'll say that before, let's say 2022, a lot of investors, and I'm sure this has been talked about in your podcast, and you've heard this, is they've been looking at total addressable market, how big is the market that you can capture, what's the vision. Now the shift is much more on, in the past year and a half, 2 years, has been much more on what's repeatable, high quality revenue that you can earn, even profit margins, what's kind of how are you thinking about being efficient as you grow, right? It's no longer throwing just however much money
Yeah,
to
yeah.
capture a huge amount of dollars and a huge amount of market share.
And that's an interesting point you make, Dan. I guess like I think a lot of VCs were less, what do you call that? Less concerned about like profitability, right? Like that never mattered to them. And then what do you think prompted that change in like attitude or overall market like strategy? Because it wasn't there before, I guess necessarily like in 2018 to like 22, right? Like, but then do you think that the pandemic just changed that shift of wanting startups to be profitable, or like, if you had to put a finger on it, I know it's kind of opinion based and it's not really everyone's stance, but yeah, do you think it's just that they've seen the track record of startups who are never profitable and their portfolio companies just never went where they needed to go, or do you think it's just that it's a better financial decision from a investor perspective, right?
Yeah, I think it's all based on sentiment. And so you see a sentiment shift. I and you know
Yeah.
I would say that it's you see a sentiment shift, and you see for investors they are thinking about how do we exit out of this investment, right? Like what is it that we need to see this company achieve in order to kind of get to that next level? And so in early days, I think you could see companies like WeWork, you can see companies like Uber, you can see all these companies that were losing a lot of money, but still IPO and be very profitable, successful. Um, Now you see less of that happening in the public markets. And so I think that's what drives investor sentiment because it flows all the way down the chain, right? Because investors do care about the next exit. But that's why I think it's really important to think about just the impact and the value that the company is adding to their partners and stakeholders and for us to patients, because as long as you're adding value, someone's willing to pay you for that value. And you will be able to guarantee that you're building a very successful and additive and impactful business.
Man, that's such a good point. Yeah, I always wondered that, and I think that that answer makes a lot of sense. It's just yeah, I mean finance is a quite fascinating field when it comes to startups that are ultra risky. Did you feel like, Dan, that the when you joined the company, did you feel like it was too much of a there was a lot of risk behind like success, right? Since resources are kind of scarce and you don't know the future, whether compared to like joining like a Google or something like that, like guaranteed not failure rate. But
Yeah.
how
I think
yeah.
you have to be in the right you have to be in the right position to join a startup. I think I would say and you have to be ready for kind of the challenges that a startup can pose, right? So there's one is what's your risk tolerance? Um, you often if especially if you join a company that's much smaller, you're often going to take a pay cut, right? You might make up for it in equity, but the equity can be valuable or it cannot be valuable, right? So you have to be able to afford taking that pay cut. You have to be able to afford kind of the instability of not knowing if you're even if you perform well in your job, if that job is going to be around in 2 years or 3 years, right? And I was fortunate enough to be in a position to be able to take some risks.
Hmm.
The second part of it is also what you're expecting and looking for in a startup. I've seen highly successful colleagues and other professionals who come from really, really large companies,
Yeah.
and they're used to a set process and things being very clean and easy and people having defined responsibilities. But especially when you're in that smaller stage time frame, it's kind of
Hmm.
all hands on deck. Fires are burning, and uh, I was never a HR or a legal professional, but somehow I ended up doing that. I was also never a regulatory person, but I wrote our first FDA submission for a product. So like things, you kind of have to wear a lot of hats and you kind of have to kind of learn on the fly and be comfortable and enjoy different projects, learning on different things and pushing yourself into uncomfortable situations. And I think the last part of that is as you think about startups, um, it's on what you want to feel like you're like what you want from the work that you're doing. It's much easier in a startup to feel like your work has impact because you're one of a few people who are doing things that can change how the company is run, and you have more of a say. And if the company grows rapidly, then you have the opportunity to grow with the company, right? If you work for a Google or a Facebook, it's a great place to work, and you definitely have impact as well, and they have great mission and values, and definitely much clearly articulated mission and values,
Yeah, true.
and all that. But you are one of thousands of people, and so just by looking at the numbers and looking at how much your voice can be heard and how much you can influence the company, it's probably less, and you probably have a slower or a longer process to get to grow with the company, as since it's already mature.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. I think that yeah, yeah, it's such a new space, right? Startups are a new space in a sense that they haven't been around for 10 years plus, or you know, it's quite interesting. I guess a couple quick questions here, Dan, or like what do you think like the MIT MBA, or getting a what do you call it? Yeah, an MBA in general, like added to your career, because it's a big decision, right? And I think like
Yeah,
especially from a school like that one,
yeah,
uh can change your life, but it's also a risk in a sense that you take on a lot of, I don't know, loans, or just 2 years of your life go in a different academic direction. Yeah, just what are your thoughts on MBA versus just working a career, or like pursuing an MBA in general?
yeah. I think there's a few reasons why people do it. I personally loved it. Um, I had a really good experience, and I wouldn't be in the position I am without going to get my MBA. You have a few reasons why I think, having gone through an MBA experience, that you would go and do one. One is you're trying to transition. So, for example, it's really hard if you're a product manager to transition and become, let's say let's say a finance person, right? If you want to move from corporate finance to being a product manager or vice versa, that's really hard. You go through an MBA, or if you're a teacher and you want to move into the corporate world, it's really hard. You go through an MBA and you can go into consulting, you can go into being a PM. Your background almost doesn't matter as much. So it's a great way to transition into a place, in a position that you don't really have a lot of experience for, and it would be much harder for you to transition to. Of course, that comes with a lot of the learnings that comes from an MBA, that everyone's getting the same access to courses, so that the assumption that a lot of companies do is that you will have learned a lot of the skills in order to transition into the new position. The other things that are really important is you hear about how in the corporate world and in business, networking is really important. And you get a lot of access when you are in an MBA. Access to peers who will go off and do really cool things at different companies, and be successful and grow with you as your career grows, but also access to, let's say, other individuals, like whether it be VC firms, who are more likely to give you the time of day. If you're a group
Yeah,
of
sure.
like MIT MBA students working on a startup, than a group of random people with no affiliation who's working on a startup, right? Or like even doctors willing to talk to you if you're, let's say, an MBA, your MBA students working on a startup versus just cold outreach. So it does give you credibility and access to a network, and also a network of alumni, of course, that probably are
Yeah.
much more willing to help support for things.
Man,
Um,
I like that point. I just asked that because I think on Instagram I saw something that said these three books will give you more in education than an MBA, and I was like,
yeah.
that's absurd, right?
Well, and if you're looking from the purely knowledge base side of it, it could be. You could probably you could read a bunch of books and learn more than you can learn from taking, some of the classes there. But it's the network, it's the ability to transition to a new field. Like, if you want to transition from if I want to transition to be a product manager, how does, let's say, how would Google or Facebook know that I know how to be a product manager if all my experiences in finance. They probably wouldn't
Sure.
even interview me, to be honest, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I guess what Dan, a couple more things here. Like, I know like one thing we could talk about is like the emotional challenges that come with the doubts of, like non-guaranteed success or just I guess like an early stage idea or product that is relatively young. Do you think that there's something that you guys as a team or operate group of operators do to or that have done or have sorry have done to um I guess get closer to like objective milestone line when it comes to I guess getting the FDA approval or just anything with like major that you'd consider like major milestones or revenue goals or things like that. Because I guess like it's just is it contingent mainly on like sales or is it mainly like just I guess in the healthcare space it's dependent on that that sentiment, right? Or like that feedback from
Kind of what do we consider as success?
yeah, I guess so. Or like what would you say like is needed to get into like the different levels of growth, I guess, right? Like because there's also that factor of like can this succeed when you don't know before you do it, right?
Yeah. There's proof points. I think that's what you're saying. Like,
Sure.
and everyone individually have to kind of make their own call of what they think is success because there are, let's say we have a goal of making technology like using technology to improve patient outcomes, right? Like that's a really big overarching goal. How do we get there? And there's multiple layers of how do you get there. Of hey, we want to build this product, and we want to eventually build a product that can help with decision support. But and each of these products that you're trying to build, there's different milestones. For Scout, our FDA cleared product, it was first to build the product, then to run a clinical study in the US, then to get FDA clearance, and now to finally sell it and to make sure that we're actually giving doctors the value that we think we're bringing with our product.
Mhm.
Um, in a startup scenario, if you're talking about being inside a startup and trying to dealing with the uncertainties of success and what kind of are wins that I celebrate or that what keeps me going, and then I think of it as um, if I look back, because for me, I feel like every 3 months things change dramatically, and if I look back, have things generally changed for the better or for the worse? And I generally have stayed around because I think every 3 months things have changed for the better. There's always things that could be more improved more. We could always earn more revenue. We could always do better on this KPI. But overall, I think there's been really good positive progress. And some months are slower than others. But if I look back and say, hey, 3 months ago, this is where we were and this is here where we are now, and I feel happy with that, that kind of is a win for me.
Man, yeah, that's such a good point. I think like some people don't realize to reflect on like what's just happened and they're always just concerned about like the future or like making more money, it seems like. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think as an entrepreneur or somebody that works very closely with the entrepreneurs or founders in the space, like that's such a good way to be level-headed and oriented towards like progress, right?
right.
A couple quick questions here, Dan, before we let you out of here. What would you say has been like your favorite memory, I guess, from your time at the company and yeah, just favorite you have favorite memory or like experience?
Yeah. I would say I've really actually enjoyed one of the things I remember the most is when we got our FDA clearance. And the reason why I say that is because I got thrown into the FDA like kind of regulatory role without any experience and any idea that I was going to get thrown into that.
Yeah, sure.
And, it was a long 2 year process before we got close to the FDA clearance. And when that came down and we got approved, it was just it was almost a surreal experience because it had taken so many people working together to get here, and we were never sure if we were going to get that. We thought we had a really good product, but we've never gone through the whole process. And somewhere I found myself leading that process at that time. having no knowledge and experience, and everyone was putting so much work into it and really pouring out their souls into making sure that we were successful. And being leading that project and actually seeing that result was really rewarding for me, just in terms of my own personal kind of
Hmm.
feeling of achievement, but also glad that the team that had put so much work into it achieved a goal that um, we all wanted to see.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I was watching something on Netflix. It was like something about like the history of OxyContin, and like they had
yeah,
they cheated though. They like paid the guy off, or like they did something illegal. But
yeah.
they once
I
like
yeah.
yeah, once the FDA person or somebody in the regulatory space was like, yeah, you can submit this drug or whatever, and then they just
Uh-huh.
went wild and partied.
Yeah.
But
Well, it sounds like they took a shortcut because
right.
we spent many weekends and long nights trying to figure things out. There's one time when we had to pull data, and I remember we had 20 people here working until midnight trying to pull the data in order to get the FDA the data that they needed for a response before like the timeline was up. And so it was just like lots of um
Hmm.
lots of last minute rushing and everything.
One cool thing you brought up there, Dan, was like the working late nights at something. With when it came to that, like, what do you think made you committed to doing that, right? Was it more than it had to be more than yeah, like what do you think makes you and everyone else there want to do that when they could say, let's just do this next week and let's go home and have a drink or something, right?
Yeah. I think it's dependent on the type of person that you're working with, and also how much they believe in the mission and values, and how much um, this matters to them. For me, I've always felt like if I want to work at a company where I'm willing to put in the hours, extra hours and more hours to make sure that the company is successful. But for others to be able to motivate and lead your team to be willing to do that, that's a lot more to ask for. In finance, it's easy because what they do is they just pay you a lot of money, and they expect you to work more because you're getting paid a lot of money.
At like a bank, right?
Here,
Like Wall
yeah,
Street Bank or
yeah,
something.
at a bank or at a private equity firm or something like that, or if you're a lawyer, right? But here you have to motivate people from things other than money, because we don't have a lot of money to throw at people, right? It's you're more closely balancing your runway and trying to make sure you have enough time to achieve your goals. Uh, and so what you end up doing is you have to have really good culture. You have to have really good values and mission. You have to find people who are aligned behind that, and you have to keep on making sure that they're aligned behind that, so that when people are willing to just step up and do it for the team. And it can't be something that's constant. If you're asking people to work until midnight every day, I think that's also really hard to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great answer, man. Yeah, I think that I think I noticed like one or two things gets people to perform. It's like either the fear of being fired or I guess like that yeah, what you said, like having a goal that's very important for whatever reason you might find and or it could be just a passion. You're passionate about doing that stuff, right? Like passionate about
Exactly. Yeah.
it could be like making healthcare products or it could be just making something move towards optimized, I guess, like outcome, which it's all broad, right? But like if it relates to you, then it's something that you know you want to do, then it seems like you don't have to worry about time or anything. It's a crazy concept because when I think like a lot of entrepreneurs, they want to do something, but then nothing always perfectly aligns, right? So it's always that struggle of here and there. But it's a really good point, really good answer. I like that. Last couple questions I think we'd like to talk to you or hear from you are if you could have a dinner with anybody in the world, similar like how Warren Buffett does a auction for whoever wants to eat dinner with him, who do you think that would be with?
Great question. Um, I assume it's someone who's alive right now.
Yeah, yeah. Although you could say somebody who's not alive, right? That's all good. No real rules.
Yeah, well, I'll put a controversial answer because I feel like a lot of times people don't. I think it'd be really interesting to kind of have a conversation with, let's say, someone like Elon Musk. He's a very controversial figure, and a lot of people, some supporters of him and some not. But I think just given what he's been able to accomplish and also the way his thought process has worked, especially recently, I would love to have a conversation with him to understand how he thinks, because some of the things I can learn is what I shouldn't do based on what he says. Some things it can be, I'm sure there's things I can learn from that conversation of how he was able to grow so many different companies to be successful is also some valuable lessons. So I think that would be something that would be really interesting for me to talk to.
Next question, Dan, is what would you say is like your favorite food? Or what would you
So,
eat dinner with him, right? Like that's funny.
well, it depends who's buying. If he's buying, then let's go Michelin star restaurant, somewhere fancy. But I also really like, so I think my comfort food is much more it's really interesting because I would say I grew up with like, so
Mhm.
I'm Chinese American. My parents are Chinese, so I grew up with a lot of like just Chinese cooking, and so of course that's something that's very comfortable for me, and something that I would kind of go back to a lot. But also I grew up in the U.S. and kind of the treat that I had was like getting pizza at Pizza Hut or Domino's, and so like I always every month or so would love, like, even though it's bad for my diet and all that, pizza, burgers, guilty pleasure of like fried chicken, things like that
Sure,
is
sure.
uh, I just really enjoy stuff like that.
Random question, Dan, but like what I know like you guys do preventative colon cancer stuff screening. Like what can somebody do to prevent themselves from getting what's that word? Like colon issues in general, right? Not even cancer, just
Yeah,
yeah, good good.
definitely don't eat like me, which is liking to eat all this crazy stuff. But no, I would say I think again, a lot of it is driven by your age, your family history, certain genetic factors. But I think, and I'm not fully the medical person here, but I think a lot of it can be controlled by diet as well. I think some of the more like the healthier diets that people have talked about have been like the Mediterranean diet, where you're eating like more vegetables, more fiber, healthy oils, protein from seafood rather than like red meat. But I think there's all sorts of ways that you can do it as long as you have balance,
Mhm.
and the way that you're eating, and of course with exercise as well.
That's a good point.
But
Yeah.
that's not medical advice because I don't necessarily have that medical knowledge.
Man, yeah, so true. I think like yeah, there's a growing concern of like what happens to your body at this time. One thing, yeah, well, next question is what was your do you have like a favorite book that you've read that you think added a lot of value to your life and career? Last person we had said 1984 by Orwell, but could be anything, right?
Yeah, that's a good.
Maybe favorite author in general too, I guess, or
Yeah, I would say that there's a few books I've thought about that have various concepts that I've really enjoyed. And so in some ways, sometimes I look at business books or like books like business books about business, or books written about business, or businessmen, or women, where there's a key concept that you can pull out. Sometimes a lot less than the number of pages, but there's certain concepts, right? Like for one of the books I've read, um, it was about blitzscaling, and there were certain concepts about how can you blitzscale well that I thought was really important as we ended up blitzscaling. There's another book about like technology adoption, and I can pull up the names of those and the
it's
authors
a
of those. I'm just kind
Reed
of
Hoffman, right? Like the
yeah,
blitzscaling.
yeah, exactly.
Chris Yo, yeah.
Yes, exactly. That was the scaling one. There's another one about technology adoption that talks about like the different types of um, early adopters versus late adopters, and how you think about segmenting the market, that I thought was really impactful and helpful. So I think this is a long-winded answer of saying nothing specific that I can point to that's one particular book, but kind of books that pertain to situations I'm in and have very valuable kind of key insights I can rely on have been helpful. Or even like some of the case studies that you see in business schools and that are published online can sometimes help you kind of gain insight of how other people have done certain things.
Gotcha. Last two questions here. Like, what advice do you give to a seed founder that's trying to achieve, I guess, similar stuff that the company that Iterative's achieved when it comes to like raising future rounds? Or that could be so broad, right? But like,
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah. I would say be very clear about what your goals are. Be very clear about what you're trying to don't be afraid to dream big about what you want to do with the company that you're building. And don't be afraid to kind of change things around. If things aren't working or if you need to like modify certain things,
Awesome.
it's some costs, right? So you gotta switch things up so that it works out.
Man, that's such a good answer. Last question, Dan, is if you could articulate your personal startup mindset, what would you say that it is?
Yeah, I think it's one, always believe that you can do things. And so kind of being willing to work on, to wear different hats. And even if you have no experience, being willing to, and confident in yourself that you can provide a good outcome for the business because the business needs you to, right? You can't, especially in the early stages, as a startup, you can't afford to hire experts in everything. So you kind of have to have people who are willing to step in and take on those roles. So being confident that and believing in yourself and believing in the business, and then also thinking about like always changing. Because if you're at a startup and the startup is successful, that startup will need you to be a different type of person probably every 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
You might have to be an individual contributor the first 6 months. You might have to start being a manager of a few people the next 6 months. You might have to be much more of a higher level executive in a year or two and build relationship with board members and kind of build out layering behind your team. And so you just have to be willing and confident in changing yourself and learning more over time.
Man, that's such a valuable answer. Yeah, I definitely could take a lot from that. Well, last thing, Dan, is like, what any last words to the audience, or how do people figure out how to get in touch with Iterative or yourself or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to always talk to other folks working in startups or even other founders and entrepreneurs. So happy to kind of share my contact information with you if they want to reach out. But it's been really, really fun and interesting, exciting to talk to you on this, and really enjoyed the conversation. So
same here. Thanks again, Dan, and best of luck too. I'm definitely gonna be following along, seeing what happens from here. And
sounds good. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of your podcast.